learn with me what the hell is going on. Someone needs to get this message to the defense. Welcome. Have to use brain power. Let me help out Dr. Russell here.
Many people suffer from what's called an acute grief reaction.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
The investigation was done with honor, integrity, and all the evidence pointed in one direction only.
Buchanan was so defensive and unable to throw Proctor under the bus because he loved him.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Then we add what we know about Michael Proctor. This guy is just the world's biggest. On every level that a person could be, between incompetence and stupidity, Michael Proctor wins the award for a combination of both. They killed him. Who are all the powers that be? Look at the smile on his face. That's what happened. That's what happened. So she doesn't actually want them to get here quickly, and that's the reason why she doesn't say there's an officer down. Meet the Bar Association of Norfolk County's Person of the Year.
I routinely do when I work with attorneys, okay? I prepare this on my own.
Oh my God. See? You see it? It is undeniable.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Holy you guys. Build some way to feed her ego. So if you have absolutely nothing to do with the death of John O'Keefe, why start crying on the stand? Hank Brennan deserves an award for being the most unlikable human being that the world has ever seen. Consciousness of guilt. I would really like somebody to do the right thing in this case.
Sergeant Barrows, is this the condition of the right rear taillight?
Absolutely not.
At no point do you wake up or go outside and say to somebody, why are you here? What if there was a gunman? Because you don't know. How do I know? There's 40 cops in front of my very small front yard. That's the bedroom window. Here's Sonny. Hey, hi, everybody. There's my son. Hello. Sonny barks if you walk by my window and sneeze.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
I wasn't going to record a video today, but then I stumbled upon this. Peter met with Adam Lally for lunch. During this lunch, Adam Lally told Peter that he knows the poor person. Oh, my God. This is not good.
Now you're starting to see the blurs easier.
You see those two blurs?
Are moving around.
She absolutely knows it would not be Karen Reed's defense team that she'd have to worry about. It would be the defense who she lied to.
Is the defendant not guilty or guilty?
A juror explaining why she voted to acquit Karen Reed of that second-degree murder charge for allegedly ramming her SUV into John O'Keefe during a blizzard in 2022.
A collision did not occur. I can't assess the motive to this sloppy police investigation.
And the toughest moment for her? Hearing the derogatory text messages about Reed sent by lead homicide investigator Michael Proctor just hours after he got the case.
Whatever timestamp was on that deleted wall file is the time that she did that search. And she deleted it. Let's make sure and pin it on this girl who I hope kills herself. That's a class act. You are a class act, Michael Proctor. Definitely someone should give you a gun and a badge. 100% sure that Karen did not do this.
Number one is I could not be standing here without these amazing supporters who have supported me and my team financially and, more importantly, emotionally for almost 4 years. And the second thing I want to say is no one has fought harder for justice for John O'Keefe than I have.
How dare they?
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Benigno. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a 6th-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor, and I am here breaking down the Justice for John O'Keefe case. And I apologize for the technical difficulties because, as you can see, I am in a different place, a new place, a different background. Had to get the whole thing set up. And of course, I thought it was all ready and it wasn't. So at the very last minute, I had to switch computers because this computer that I was working on just didn't work, just decided not to work at all. And I think it's probably an older computer. Probably my guess is that, it's done well by me, but it's time to go. So I just quickly transitioned to my new computer. So thank you for sticking with me and welcome to all of you beautiful people. It was really cool. I got a chance to sit here and take a look at the chat and say hi to everybody. Hi, everybody. So it's nice to see everyone. Yeah, really interesting time, right? So we're like in the post Karen Read trial weirdness. It's like the abyss. All these people, the law tubers, whatever they're called, seem like they're not really sure what to do. Everyone's kind of talking about the Diddy verdict. There's people talking about the Kohlberger case, which just, it's all right. I think it's really tough after being in the Karen Read zone for so long, right? You're in it for so long, and then to have finally won, and now there's like this, this feeling of like, oh no, now what? Now we're back to like the dreary kind of whatevers, right? But actually, I've been loving it because it has given me an opportunity to go back. And I've been wanting to do that for a long time. I've been wanting to go back and dig into the first trial, into all the things that I maybe glossed over or, didn't look at carefully. I wanted to spend some time tracking the taillight throughout the January 29th day, right? To find out, okay, where did these guys actually plant the evidence? Who was the person who literally took some taillight pieces from the Sallyport over to 34 Fairview, right? What is everybody's role in all of this? And because of the trial going on day in and day out, I just did not have an opportunity to do any of that. So this has been fun for me because I get to go back through everything now and try to figure out what really happened here, right? So that's been really interesting. And yeah, I mean, I see people talking about Tully, mentioning Tully, and he's a very, very interesting character in all this. To me, he's maybe the most important because he's the guy, right? He's the guy. He's the guy who is responsible for, of course, everything that's going on with Turtle Boy. He's the guy that went digging around in, Karen and Karen's father and Karen's brother and Karen's friends, went digging around in their banking records and everything to try to dig up something going on between Turtle Boy and Karen Read. And of course, there was nothing there. He was the one that went and testified in front of the grand jury. And so to try to bring a case that the two of them were somehow colluding, I guess, to intimidate witnesses. And of course, nothing came of that. He, to me, Brian Tully, is like the district attorney Morrissey's little lackey. Like he's the guy that, goes out and does the dirty work. And so he's such an important person in all of this. And one thing that just didn't get discussed enough, right, is the fact that Brian Tully was sitting in each and every prep for all of the Commonwealth witnesses. But I knew he was doing that for this trial, right? I knew that he had done that, going back to Nuttall, going back through, everybody, Jen McCabe, obviously, anybody that testified in this trial, Burgess, right? He went and picked up Burgess at the airport in Texas. So I thought, I wonder if he's been doing that, all along. Like, has Tully been part of this? Has he been in every, prosecutor's prep meeting from the very beginning? And as it turns out, he has, right? He has. So when I went back and I listened to, some of the just boring testimony, right, with whoever, Caitlin Albert or her boyfriend or not now husband, I guess, Tristan. As it turns out, yeah, guess what? He was there for all of those witness interviews, whatever you want to call them, also, which is fascinating because explain to me how that's not intimidation. How is that? That guy is so intimidating. How is that not a witness intimidation charge, right? And it's just ridiculous, right? They're trying to say that Turtle Boy is intimidating witnesses when we're talking about Brian Albert, we're talking about, Jennifer McCabe. Just the absurdity, the ridiculousness of all of it. It's just more unimaginable garbage from the Commonwealth. And of course, to me, the Turtle Boy case is a little scary because with these people, what they do is they double down. Anytime you think, if you ever have the thought, they can't really be serious about this. How are they going to bring this? This doesn't even make sense. This is absurd. They have nothing. Every single time you have that thought, they double down and they go after you tenfold. And my concern is that they're gunning now for him, for Aidan Carney. I also think that was part of what that ridiculous interview on ABC with that, McAlbert's was really about. I think they were gunning for him and are gunning for him because despite the fact that, he maybe started all of this, it certainly has gotten much bigger than him now, right? I mean, all of this attention from all over the world, luckily, thank God for Turtle Boy, but it started there. It is now much bigger. And hopefully, he can kind of get himself out of this. Hopefully something happens, right? He's got certainly great attorneys and, I'm sure, but they're going to try. They're going to try their damnedest. And I think that's what they're doing now. This is all about the court of public opinion, right? What we're seeing with the McAlberts and anybody, and even the DA and Hank Brennan's ridiculous statement that was obviously written in large part by the district attorney, Michael Morrissey. So what they're doing, right, they're talking a lot about witness intimidation and how, we can't have this. And at the end of the day, what are we really talking about? We're really talking about Turtle Boy holding people accountable for, the most serious crime of murdering a police officer. That's really what we're talking about. So the absurdity continues, but of course, the DA has to figure out why they're not going to reopen an investigation. So that they have to make their case, of course, for why they're not going to, look into this anymore. Why there's not going to be, okay, well, Karen Read didn't do it, so somebody else did. Now they have to, make a case there. And so clearly, what are they going to do now? They're going to come out and to the O'Keefe family and say, we were just kidding. Karen didn't do it. So now we're going to reopen investigation and see who really did. Obviously, that's not happening. Not unless another DA was to get elected, right? So, I guess we'll see. It's been interesting to see all the attorneys doing their thing, right? To see Alan Jackson, I think he's going to be on with Turtle Boy, if I'm not mistaken, on Saturday, which should be interesting. I think that's right. I think that's this Saturday. But he, of course, has, done some, he was on with Howie Carr. Then we saw, of course, Yannetti and Alessi making their rounds, and that's been really interesting. I can't wait to hear from Alan Jackson more in more detail. Certainly, I think probably Aidan Carney is the greatest person in the world for Alan Jackson to sit down with because he's gonna, Aidan's gonna just ask everything that all of us would want to ask. Of course, right? He's going to ask Alan Jackson everything, which is so exciting. So I cannot wait for that. That is really, really, really exciting. And that's largely because AJ does not seem like he's afraid to tell the truth. It does appear like, Yannetti and Alessi, and I'm not sort of blaming them, right? They're trying to be kind of politically correct, maybe trying to, not throw the judge under the bus. And of course, Alan Jackson is not doing that, right? And maybe that's because he's from California. He doesn't have to worry about being in a courtroom again with Judge Beverly Cannoni anytime soon. But it's awesome to see somebody telling the truth, right? That's That's what it feels like to me. It's nice that Alan Jackson is saying what all of us have felt all along, which is that this judge was biased, what she was doing teeters on criminal, and that she was trying to tip the scales of justice in favor of the Commonwealth, right? I mean, to me, that was just very, very transparent all along. So nice to hear somebody say it, somebody on the defense team just say it. So what have I been working on? What do I want to talk about tonight? I need your help on this. And I'm sure that someone in this chat, one of you, has done some of this investigative work already, or who will be able to help me in my investigative efforts. So I am tracking what I've been doing. I have been tracking the basically the whereabouts of all of the police investigators throughout the day on January 29th, 2022, starting with Sergeant Good and Sergeant Lank, who's now Lieutenant Lank, Detective Sergeant Lank at the time, and of course Officer Seraph, but you know, that came and went pretty quickly. Gallagher, right? And then sort of tracking the handoff to Michael Proctor and Yuri Buchanan when they get involved. And then at what point, where do they go? Who are they talking to? What are they doing? And there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening when you track the sort of through line through that day to the tail light, to the CERT team. And when that CERT team arrives at 34 Fairview, who arrives when they say they arrive versus when they actually arrived, and what happens in that time between, let's say, 5:30, when the car arrives at the Sally Port, when Karen's SUV arrives at the Sally Port, to, you know, those text messages that we see from Michael Proctor at 10:52 on that night. Very, very interesting. So what I wanted to show you guys, and I can't wait to hear from all of you on this, I wanted to show you, I want to take a look at some very interesting testimony that I pieced together first from the very first trial with Sergeant Good. Now, this is a quick little video I put together, but I wanted to make sure that everybody had seen this. I had not seen it. This was, when I really first got invested in this case was right at the beginning of the first trial. So, I guess I probably saw this, but I just didn't register. Like, I really didn't register what we were talking about, what he was saying. Like, I didn't know enough at the time to really understand the gravity of this testimony and what it's David Yannetti, who I love seeing Yannetti get to do his things. Yannetti's just a fantastic attorney. We didn't get to see as much of him in this last trial, and that's tragic because he has some of like the most classic speeches of anybody in the ethers of the Karen Reed saga. So, the how dare you speech is definitely like my favorite of all time. And yes, I see people talking about, shoes and this type of stuff. And so we will definitely get to that also. All right. So I'm going to play now for you all this very quick little video of Sergeant Good's testimony where David Yannetti is cross-examining him on a piece of, I guess, evidence. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge. But again, remember, this is all in the context of the taillight and trying to determine, like, was there who, where, what, why, and when around the taillight and the planting of evidence at 34 Fairview. And here's the thing, right? Obviously, we know, and all of us know, I mean, if you're here with me, my guess is you know, or at least very likely are close to knowing that Karen Reed there was no car accident on January 29th of 2022. And that we know just from ARCA, right? We know that from ARCA. And I've gone back and listened to a lot of that testimony to really try to grasp in my core what these two guys are saying, right? Like, I'm that kind of person. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm obsessive. If I have a question, I need to know, and I will need to know until I know it, and I know it all the way, right? So I finally feel like I have a pretty good sense of exactly what those two guys were saying, what the ARCA guys were saying, Dan Wolf and Dr. Rentschler. And so I am now able to say with certainty a car accident could not have happened due to Newton's laws, right? Due to the laws of physics. So now that I am very certain about that, it makes the way that they handled planting the evidence even more bizarre, right? It's like, it's so obvious that this group of cops really just never thought that they would ever they would ever have their feet certainly held to the fire, right? Like they were never going to they were never going to have this kind of public scrutiny on them. And here we are, right? Here we are. So these freaking guys, like, oh my God, they drive me nuts. The investigators in this case, like their arrogance, just the way that they, the way that they just carry themselves, everything about all of them, just like the audacity of these people. It's just crazy. It's just so crazy. All right. So with that, let's get this going. And then, of course, I want to hear from all of you. Film Freak, thank you so much for gifting a membership. I appreciate you so much for doing so. And let's see if I can get this to work. Hopefully it will work. Let's switch to this.
Sergeant Good, you have previously testified about the details in these reports. You would agree that each of these reflects your report. It says reporting officer Sergeant Sean Good, correct?
Yes.
Each of these is page 1 of your report, correct?
Yes.
You've previously testified that you call that the face sheet of the report, correct?
Yes.
Each of these has the identical incident number and call number, correct?
Yes.
The identical date and time reported, correct?
Yes.
The identical report date and time, correct?
Yes.
And of course, the identical officer.
Yes.
Other than the print date of the face sheet of your report, one appears to be in January, one appears to be in October. The major change is the photo that's included on the face sheet, correct?
Yes.
So that second photo with the piece of taillight that is included on the first page of your report, that photo is not from January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so just to be clear about what's going on here, in case people are kind of lost, this was the face sheet from Sergeant Good's report, and he was one of the guys on the scene, one of the first guys on the scene, so he's the one that made the report about what happened the morning of January 29th at the scene. That's the craziness, with Karen and Carrie Roberts and Jennifer McCabe. So this report originally has a photo of the berm, of the spot, the spot that they cleared away with the leaf blower at 34 Fairview, near where John's body was found. Okay. So the first face sheet on that report from the day after the incident, which was, I think, the 30th, so it was January 30th, 2022, had just a picture of the berm. Might have been glass pieces. It's hard for me to see in the video or in the photo. But the second, so the follow-up, the version of the report that was printed months later was replaced with taillight pieces. And this is really important because there's a very significant effort, which you wind up seeing in a very transparent way, amongst all of these cops, and you're going to see from Adam Lally and Hank Brennan, to try to obfuscate when those taillight pieces were found, to try to bump up the time that they were found so that there's no way that the state had possession of Karen Reed's car when they found the taillight, right? So they keep trying to make it earlier and earlier sounding. And here, again, is another piece of evidence of these guys going to great lengths to try to confuse the situation, to make it seem like these taillight pieces were found on that morning. And David Yannetti is not going to let Sergeant Good off the hook here, which is just awesome. He's great when he does this.
You never took a photo of a piece of taillight on January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
You never saw a piece of taillight at 34 Fairview on January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
Did you personally switch the photo on the face sheet of your police report?
No.
Do you know who did?
So whoever updated the report, their supplemental, you add photos.
But in answer to my question, do you know the specific person from your department who altered the photo on the face sheet of your report?
I didn't take the supplemental report, so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know who took the photo.
Which is a lie.
But given that this is your report, you're the reporting officer, you are responsible for the content of that report, are you not?
For my report, yes, not other officers' supplementals to an investigation.
All right, but this is your report. This is the face sheet for the reporting officer, Sergeant Sean Good, is it not?
Yes, on the face sheet.
All right. Now, would you agree with me that someone reading this report and seeing that the date and time of the report is listed as January 29th of 2022 at 8:24 a.m., that's when you wrote it, correct?
That's when I logged in, yes.
Somebody reading that and seeing a photo of a piece of taillight might believe that that photo is from the same date that you're writing the report, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you think it's misleading to include a photo on the face sheet of the report when the report is dated January 29th of 2022 and the photo is not from that day, it's from sometime later?
Objection.
Sustained.
Yeah, so that's it. It's a quick little, just a little, excerpt from Sergeant Good's testimony, but I had missed that the first time, right? I had totally missed that. And, again, it's like I saw it, but I didn't know what to make of it, I guess. So I didn't understand the significance. But of course, and again, it's just another example of how this group of cops, whether they are the ones that were the Canton cops in the morning, right? Whether it's the MSP cops or whether it's the Boston cops, everybody in this milieu of cops does some really shady things. And he's lying, of course, when he says he doesn't know who the person is that updated the report. At one point, I cut this part out. He kind of suggests that it might have been Lank. Would that be a surprise to anybody if it was Lank, right? Would that be a surprise? So, it could have been, but it also could have been Berkowitz because, of course, right? He was knee deep in all of this. He, of course, found that giant piece of taillight, and I'm working on that. And that's another thing that I want to speak to you guys to take a look at because I'm in the middle. So what I'm in the middle of doing, I am in the middle. Welcome, Andrea, of putting together this following the trail of the evidence video. And in doing that, it's very labor intensive because I really have to go through and listen to all these cops. And a lot of it is freaking boring. But when you go through it, you wind up finding stuff like this Sergeant Good face sheet that I didn't even realize was a thing. So I'm glad I'm doing it, but it's a lot. And it's, like I said, labor intensive. I also will point something out that was really interesting. So in the first trial, there is a moment. Remember, we learned in the second trial that Miss Kelly Devers is the one that takes over dispatch for Sergeant Good so that he can go to 34 Fairview, right? So in the first trial, Adam Lally must have not been sure whether the defense was going to call Kelly Devers, but knew that it was a possibility. So what Lally does when Sergeant Good is on direct, he asks him about that. He says, did somebody take over dispatch for you so that you could go to the scene? And he says, yes, it was Miss Devers, right? Then Lally brings in a sign-in, an in and out sign-in sheet. And he tries to introduce evidence that must have been where Kelly Devers signed in and signed out. And I'm going out on a limb and saying that for sure, the whole point was to show us that she had left, her shift ended at something like around 3 o'clock. But the defense objects, and for whatever reason, the judge doesn't allow it in at that time. So we never get to hear what it was that Lally was trying to introduce. My guess is that that's what it was. I would go out on a limb and say I'm pretty sure about that. So very interesting, very interesting. And as you're going to see, because we're going to watch another video here, and this is where I'm going to need your help, because we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at the mirrored video, unmirrored, right? That was like one of the great classic moments from the first trial where these evil human beings try to, you know, present a mirrored video of the Lexus with a bunch of guys standing behind it, which appears to be the left taillight. And then, of course, oh yeah, next day turns out, oh yeah, it's really the right taillight. You still wonder how the judge didn't call a mistrial at that very moment. I mean, you don't actually wonder, because we all know that so-called Judge Beverly Cannoni was in on it, right? Did everything she could to tip the scales of justice in the favor of the Commonwealth. And that just goes to show you how good this defense team actually was, because despite all of her efforts to do everything she could to help Lally and Hank, when all is said and done, the jury fully acquits, right? I mean, that says a lot about the evidence and about the defense team in this case, because they were doing a lot with, despite the fact that she refused to let so much in. Oh, and don't let me forget, I also want to take a look at the video of Alan Jackson walking through the house. Don't let me forget that. That's something else I want to do tonight also. If you haven't seen that, it's interesting, and I would love to get your take on that as well. So what we're going to do is this is so important, right? Because we're trying to figure out, and as we go through all this video, what I want you guys to be thinking about is, okay, the timeline. The timeline is the key. And all these cops do go to great lengths to try to obfuscate the timeline. And not just the cops, everybody in the Commonwealth. Lally does it maybe more egregiously than anybody else, which is just disgraceful. So I'm going to need your help probably in this effort, because, yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? You got to kind of like keep your eye on the ball to try to figure out who is where and when, so that we can figure out how these 3 little pieces, which turned out to be 4, but how these little tiny pieces of taillight wound up at 34 Fairview. That's the key. That's the key question. So I'm going to start this now. And just before we get that going, you know, put it in the chat whenever you get a moment. I'm curious, what did you guys think about the Diddy trial? Did you think that the verdict made sense? Were you surprised? Did you think that was the just verdict? I'd be curious to hear. To me, it was not surprising at all. You know, it was exactly, if I had thought it through at all, probably exactly the charges that I would have guessed. Because the RICO, you know, whenever you try to take that RICO statute and apply it to cases that don't exactly fit, right? It's always questionable. That's been my experience with RICO. So, but yeah. I mean, it's tough because Diddy's just such a bad guy. I mean, he's just such a bad guy. He's like the world's most textbook narcissist. So it's really sad. It's really sad, but not surprising. Yeah, not surprising. That's how I would say it. Sad, but not surprising. All right, so here we go. Now we're going to start with Detective Sergeant Lank. Now, if you remember, if you're not, maybe you don't know who Sergeant Lank was, but remember, Sergeant Lank is Jen McCabe's buddy and a really good friend going back years and years of Chris Albert. So him and Chris were buds. He's helped the Albert family out of trouble in the past. I think he helped both Chris and maybe Tim Albert, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back and look more carefully at that. But he's helped the Alberts out of jams in the past. And that gets brought up during his testimony. We're not going to take a look at that here. But again, we're just kind of, we're trying to get a sense for who knew what, where, and when. And the critical question in the beginning is, when did these guys, when did Proctor and Buchanan, and then Tully, Brian Tully, he's really important, when did they know that John O'Keefe was a cop? Because they try to obfuscate that as well, right? So these are the kinds of things that we're keeping in mind. And why is that important? Because in order for taillight to have been planted, they would have had to decide very early on that they needed to ensure Karen Read was guilty. Now, remember, like, think about this, right? We're talking about all of this happening. So between 7 a.m. when Proctor and Buchanan sort of get involved initially, and 10:52 p.m. when Michael Proctor's at home texting his, kindergarten buddies, right? So when you think about this, when you think about that's a lot for one day, and they had to have decided that by 5 p.m. approximately, they needed to plant taillight evidence at the scene because there wasn't going to be enough evidence to shore up a conviction, right? So that's crazy. When you think about the fact that they had to think that quickly, that's pretty amazing. But when you actually carefully listen to the ARC guys, to the guys from ARCA, there's no other possibility, because there was no way for taillight pieces to get on John O'Keefe's clothing. There was no way for John O'Keefe's body to get, given where the car must have been, there was no way for John O'Keefe's body to get to like kitty corner, right? All the way up and behind the Lexus, off and behind to the right, like 10 feet up, maybe not quite 10 feet, but up, right, onto the lawn by the flagpole and the fire hydrant. So there's no way that can happen, which means somebody had to bring the taillight there. Who did it and when? And it was when the CERT team was on site that those first initial pieces of taillight were discovered. Now, we all know that all the taillight that comes after, that was a joke. I mean, who knows, who cares? At that point, they're all involved, they're all invested. But those three little pieces of taillight, which were critical to Karen Read's guilt, or, for them to say that she was guilty, that had to get there very quickly. And they had to be quick on their feet to determine that they were going to need it and that there wasn't going to be enough evidence. And I will tell you something, if it wasn't for Michael Proctor's big, stupid mouth, if he did not text his buddies about all the powers that be and about the fact that they weren't going to be able to prove, they weren't going to have enough evidence to prove this or that, it's possible that even all this investigating on my part, I might have not given them that much credit. I might have said, no way, these guys were not smart enough to have decided that they needed to plant taillight. I might have actually thought that. But because of Michael Proctor's texts, guess what? We know definitively, without a shadow of a doubt, that they had evidence on their minds, and they knew they were not going to have enough evidence to ensure a conviction of Karen Read. So wait till you see this. It's fascinating. So I can't wait to show you this. Now, it's very rough, just so you know, because I am in the process of making a much longer, kind of much more carefully edited video, but I just wanted to get enough together so I could present it to you guys tonight. So here we go. I'm going to add.
To turn your attention to the morning of January 29th, 2022. At some point after 6 a.m., did you receive a call in regard to a dispatch that your department had received.
Yes.
And who, if anyone, called you around that time?
Sergeant Sean Good. I believe it was 6:08. Sergeant Good stated that there was a gentleman found in the snow at 34 Fairview Road, and he was in very grave condition. And he brought it to my attention that he was also a Boston police officer. I went to 34 Fairview Road. I live fairly close, so I was on scene by, I believe it was 6:24, 6:25. When I arrived, I observed that the ambulance was still there. There was multiple EMTs, and I observed some witnesses also.
And upon your arrival on scene, who was the first person that you spoke to?
Sergeant Sean Good.
And then following talking to Sergeant Good, who, if anyone else, did you speak to on scene?
I spoke to Jennifer McCabe.
After you spoke with Ms. McCabe for 8 or 9 minutes, then who, if anyone else, did you speak to at that time?
After I spoke with Ms. McCabe, I believe I was able to then contact the CPAC unit.
Each troop duty lieutenant would have a list of who the on-call person is for the State Police Detective Unit of Jurisdiction. They would then call that trooper or sergeant directly to inform them that there's a death in a certain community and give them a telephone number to contact somebody who's directly on scene to get more information.
CPAC unit is the investigative division for the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. Yes, any sort of scene where it appears that the person is not going to survive,
So
we would
this
contact
is
State
Sergeant
Police CPAC
Michael
unit
Lang.
because they investigate all deaths. In speaking to Trooper Proctor, he advised me at that point that
And Mike Lang, you'll remember, he's really important. Remember the off the books meeting that Jen McCabe and Kerry Roberts have, that, Jen McCabe first tells the Commonwealth never happened. She's never been to Mike Lang's house. And then she remembers suddenly, oh yeah, Kerry dropped her daughter, who's friends with Mike Lang's wife, off at the house. And I was just a passenger in the car. But the day before, her sister is texting and saying, we're going to find out more at the meeting tomorrow. So we know that they had set up a meeting with Sergeant Lank, and we're, I guess, trying to find out more about the investigation or whatever. But Lank is definitely, right, an insider, one of the, I guess, Mick Albert's little lackeys. It's hard to know what name to use for him, but that is, that's his role in all this. So this is Lank. That's what makes him important. He's the guy that comes back after Brian Higgins tells Jen McCabe, wait a minute, Karen Reed said what? Her taillight was cracked? You better call your buddy Lank, get him back here, and tell him exactly what you told me, that Karen Reed was running around saying, could I have done this? And showing her that the taillight was cracked. So Lank is important because he's one of the people. He also spoke to Brian Albert and Nicole Albert that morning and ends up taking Jen McCabe's statement about, did I hit him? Could I have hit him?
they would not be responding.
Death investigations that we...
And remember, Michael Proctor, and this is all very confusing, I know, but because it's a lot, but there's another really important point here. Part of the reason why the Solo cups were used and that stupid leaf blower and the grocery shopping bags is because the state police are the ones that were supposed to respond. The Canton cops were not equipped to do this type of homicide investigation. And the only reason that they didn't just stand there and wait for them was because of the snow. So, as much as I hate to give these guys credit at all, I think Gallagher probably does deserve a little bit of credit because he saw that the snow was falling and realized that they have to just try to get as much evidence as they could, despite the fact that they didn't have any way to get the evidence. They didn't have evidence bags or evidence, kits or whatever. And they didn't have it, not because of the snow. They didn't have it because these guys were not homicide detectives. So that's kind of the point. And initially, Proctor then says, guarantee you it's because Michael Proctor is a lazy piece of garbage who initially declined to take this case because he didn't want to, at 6 o'clock in the morning in a snowstorm, didn't want to drive over to Canton, my guess, didn't want to drive to 34 Fairview. And then once gets a little bit more information, realizes this is a comp, you better get your ass over here. And then they start shoveling their driveways or whatever. So in the beginning, they're just explaining to us kind of like who did what and why in the very early hours of the investigation. that's kind of what this very early part is
We
about.
have jurisdiction over are all unattended deaths. Unattended death means that a physician, a doctor, is not overseeing the individual that passes. Those deaths would be suicides, homicides, overdose type deaths, natural deaths, accidental deaths, and so forth. Any type of death that is not seen by a doctor at a medical facility or.
Well, and what they say, so I see some of the questions in the chat, they didn't have yellow tape. Yes. Yeah, so they did. And one of the challenges was that they claim they thought it was a medical situation. That's the reason that Michael Proctor gives, technically, for not taking the case. That, oh, it was just a medical situation. And again, he wasn't, had passed. But on paper, the hospital gave him a 10% chance of life, which I think was probably, even on the very, very high end estimate, right? So in the very beginning, allegedly, it was a medical event and he hadn't passed yet. So Proctor says, no, we're not going to take the case. That changes within an hour, very, very quickly.
In a hospice type situation. In this specific situation, as I stated earlier, the DA's office has exclusive jurisdiction over death investigations, and our office has that responsibility of investigating those cases. But we work very well with local departments. Shortly after 7 a.m. that date, I received a call from Sergeant Yuri Buchanan informing me that a person by the name of John O'Keefe was found unresponsive in Canton.
Now, I want you to notice the language here. Brian Tully's using the language unresponsive. And that might sound familiar to you because coincidentally, that's the exact same language that Jennifer McCabe uses to describe John O'Keefe in her 911 call.
911, what's your emergency? I need someone to come immediately to 34 Fairview Road, Camden, Mass. What's going on? There's a guy unresponsive in the snow.
He was transported to Good Samaritan Hospital, where it was expected he was not to survive.
Right. So I see everybody talking about this. Yeah. I mean, in terms of why would, I think the big question that people wrestle with is why would Brian Albert kind of put himself in harm's way in order to like protect Brian Higgins? He didn't even like Brian Higgins. I mean, in my opinion, he really didn't even like Brian Higgins. So why the hell would he protect Brian Higgins? And I think that's a really legitimate question, and one that I have sat with quite a bit. And that is what made me initially think that Colin must have had some involvement, or at least was definitely there, in addition, of course, to Chloe. But you also have to remember something important. There was a lot of alcohol involved. And that's key because, right, like these guys were wasted. They were wasted. So I don't know that if they had all been in their right mind, that they would have responded the way that they had. My guess is that if everybody's in their right mind, why not just have Brian Higgins and Brian Albert say, oh, it was self-defense? I mean, who was ever going to question them? Like, what cops were going to say to Brian Albert and Brian Higgins if their story was the same? Oh, yeah, this guy, we got into a scuffle, but John came after me, came after us, and so we had no choice. We hit him, he fell, right? I mean, it was self-defense. Who would have, you think that what? Mike Lank is going to say, no, it wasn't? I mean, Chief Berkowitz is going to say, no, about his best friend in the whole world, Brian Higgins, that, oh, no, you're lying. I mean, these guys probably would have walked out that night. So it doesn't make sense. But I think you also always have to factor in that they were drunk, right? Because, yeah, there was a lot of alcohol consumed and that they probably did the stupid thing.
We learned that Mr. O'Keefe was an active Boston police officer. Sergeant Buchanan wanted to make me aware of it at that point. At some point, we did learn that he was
Boston police officer.
Matter of fact, you learned that morning. May not have been the first notification, but certainly early that morning you knew that John O'Keefe was a Boston police officer.
At some point we learned, I don't remember exactly when, if it was morning, just after.
So this part is really interesting to me. When Yuri Buchanan is pushed about when he finds out that John O'Keefe was a police officer, one of the things that Sergeant Good and Mike Lank give up, probably accidentally, right early on in their testimony, is that they knew and passed that information along immediately. They knew he was a cop, and they told Lank, told Buchanan, and told Proctor. So Yuri Buchanan is now saying, oh yeah, we found out he was a cop. Maybe it was like 11, maybe it was noon. That's bullshit. They all knew he was a cop, and they knew right from the start. And the more of these guys that you listen carefully to, the more you realize they all knew, and they knew right away. And Tully kind of lets it slip a little bit too, as he's kind of giving the overview of why he was involved, why he was invested, and why he ends up physically coming to 34 Fairview later on that day, right? Not something that he would have ever done in any other situation. I'm trying to follow the chat. I'm trying to see what you guys. Something. I'll try to do it.
Now, it would have been important. Why? Why is it important to this case, to Alan Jackson, when they would have known that it was a Boston police officer? So think about that. Ask yourself that question.
12, I don't know when, but we did learn that he was a Boston police officer.
As we learned more information about what was found on scene by the Canton Police Department, Trooper Proctor, who was the on-call the on-call trooper that day on the schedule, and Sergeant Buchanan responded to Canton Police to begin the investigation, and they would keep me updated as they learned more information.
You already indicated and you described in some detail that Massachusetts State Police took over the investigation from Canton Police Department around 8 or 9 a.m., correct? Following certain protocols.
Yes, at some point in the morning, once it was determined that Mr. O'Keefe was gravely injured and was being transported to the hospital with no signs of life.
Normally, I would not get a call like that, but we learned that Mr. O'Keefe was an active Boston police officer. Sergeant Buchanan wanted to make me aware of it at that point.
Yes, so that's right. So they lied about when they learned that he was a cop because, see, the whole thing all day long, as these guys are recounting what happened on that day, they're trying to make it sound like they didn't know that, because the sooner that they know that, it gives them more time to plant evidence, right? And the reason that they're planting evidence is because they wanted to make sure and shore up a conviction. Now, here's what we learn as you carefully, up to this point, even in this video, right? What we learn is a couple of things really important. Number one, Mike Lank spends 10 minutes talking to Jennifer McCabe, then calls up Proctor and Buchanan. Okay. So, and Sergeant Good, I'm sorry, and Sergeant Good. So these two, Good and Lank, are the two guys on the scene. The only person that they're talking to about what happened is 10 minutes is Jennifer McCabe. So So Proctor and Buchanan meet up, and at 10 a.m. go to the Canton police station, and guess who they talk to? They talk to Sergeant Good. So where do they go next? They go right to Jen McCabe's house, and they go and they meet with Brian Albert, Jennifer McCabe, and Matt McCabe. From there, they then go to the hospital. So by noontime, the only people that they've spoken to, all of the cops collectively, they have only spoken to either Jen McCabe or Jen McCabe, Matt McCabe, and Brian Albert. And that's critical because that's the story. Those are the people who they're listening to, right? There's nobody else. So their version of events is whatever Jen, whatever Matt, whatever Brian Albert, which is really all equals Brian Albert, whatever
they wanted the cops to believe. Those are the only people that they talk to. It's absolutely unbelievable that is how they make up their mind. So by the time that Proctor and Buchanan go to the hospital to view John O'Keefe's body, they have already had in their mind that Jen McCabe is saying Karen Reed was running around, right? Oh, could I have done this? Could I have done this? She had a cracked taillight, right? So in their minds, that's what they are looking at. And then they go and view the body. So they're not going and seeing the body with an objective eye. They're going and they're looking at the body through the lens of everything that Jennifer McCabe and Brian Albert have just made sure that these two investigators are aware of. So that's the key, right? That's how this, it's we all of us true crime people, we hear all the time about cops getting tunnel vision, cops and confirmation bias. I mean, it's like this huge thing. Every police station in the universe, right? It's such a big deal that there's trainings on this, conversations about it. What we are seeing in this investigation is basically like the poster child for what you are not supposed to do. You are not supposed to get tunnel vision, and that's exactly what they did. Everything that these guys did, they had already made up their mind that Karen Reed was guilty, and then went and tried to find evidence that supported it. And that's exactly what happened here. So as they are recounting this sequence of events, they're all trying to make it sound like they didn't know John was a cop because there'd be no reason to plant taillight. Why would we plant taillight, right? What do we care whether Karen Reed or anybody else did this? But the reason that they cared is because this was a cop, and they absolutely did care. Like the idea that they only cared about Brian Albert and protecting Brian Albert, not true. These guys, this is why Brian Tully is involved. They cared. They were angry and they wanted somebody to pay. And these guys believed that it was Karen Reed who did this. But the reason they believed that was because of Jennifer McCabe and Brian Albert. Right?
We engaged our services and responded to Canton Police to begin the investigation.
So as we learned more information about what was found on scene by the Canton Police Department, Trooper Proctor, who was the on-call trooper that day on the schedule, and Sergeant Buchanan responded to Canton Police to begin the investigation. And they would keep me updated as they learned more information. Their detective unit would be involved if they have one, and some departments in Norfolk County don't. They would stand by to wait for our arrival. There'd be constant communication between the responding trooper and the detective on scene about things that need to be done prior to our arrival, but essentially wait for our guidance on what to do next.
Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Buchanan then essentially respond to the Canton Police Department first, is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as your role as it pertains to this or any other investigation, how much involvement do you have, or how are you sort of apprised of what's going on?
Sergeant Buchanan, in this case and in typical cases, he's keeping me updated by telephone, so I can supervise from anywhere with my cell phone. He's giving me updates about what he's learning. We will discuss what the next steps should be. And that's what transpired over the morning of January 29th.
Now, over the course of the morning of January 29th.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dwayne, I completely agree that originally the idea was either to make it look like he just fell and then died of hypothermia, which is a reason why Jennifer McCabe is Googling how long to die in the cold, or that, lucky hit him. At that point, that was the idea. I think 100%. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, he was already dead. And as I've said many times, if it wasn't for the fact that it was cold out, if this had happened in the summertime, then everybody would have known John O'Keefe was dead for many hours. And even when you listen to Jen McCabe's testimony this time around, she talks about how she was trying to give chest compressions and it was hard. I mean, it's crazy. Jennifer McCabe it's tough to listen to her testimony. It really, really is. But if you do, she pretty much tells you everything. She really does. She's like the worst liar the world has ever seen. And she kind of just tells you as you are kind of going along and you're listening, you're like, oh my God, like she gives you all this information, just like her 911 call. Like her 911 call is so telling. It's like, wow, this woman really could not lie to save her life and is just doing really what Brian Albert basically told her to do. Like even the fact that she uses the language of the cops, right? Like, oh, there's a man unresponsive in the snow. What person do you know that is not a police officer and has no relationship to the police would ever use that term? If you were with a bunch of people last night, okay, you're out drinking. The next morning, you pull up at that same house and you see somebody that you were with the night before passed out on the front lawn. Are you going to go, oh, there's a man unresponsive in the snow? Like, of course not, right? That's like the last word that would ever come into my mind, unless I just called Brian Albert and Brian Albert said, tell them a man is unresponsive in the snow, right? So, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And she has, Jen McCabe gets 3 opportunities on the 911 call to tell somebody for the first time that John was found in the snow. The first time it's a man found. The second time the first time it's a man passed out. Then it's a man found. Then it's a man unresponsive, I believe. Maybe not in that order. But she gets to say it 3 times because, when you call 911, they switch you. They send you to different dispatch. And then somebody else answers and you have to say the same thing again. So she ends up having to say it a number of times. And each time, it's like she got it right. Or at least she was able to remember what Brian Albert told her to say, at least
over the course of the morning of January 29th. What, if any, conversations did you have with relation to Canton Police Department's involvement or ongoing or further involvement with regard to this investigation?
I had spoken with the acting chief at the time, the current chief, the chief at the time, Kenneth Berkowitz, about the involvement in the Canton Police Department. We talked about the homeowner at 34 Fairview and his relationship to his department. And because of the appearance of a conflict, we had made a decision that the Canton Police was going to take a step back from the investigation and that the state police would do the investigation without them.
Now, with respect to those conversations you mentioned that you had yourself and what the then current chief, Kenneth Berkowitz, who, if anyone else, was involved in those conversations?
The district attorney.
Yeah, and this is when we find out, and Brian Tully, this is when we find out from Tully who was making all the decisions. And this was interesting. I remember when I first learned this, that to learn that, Chief Berkowitz was basically involved in almost all of the conversations that Tully had with the DA, which is really interesting, right? Because what do you mean? They were recused. Why would they have been involved? But you have to remember, Michael Proctor slips up and he tells us during his testimony with Lally that he had an office in the Canton PD. He actually slips up and says, my office. We met at my office in the Canton PD. So these guys, these were really close, right? These people, like, remember, Brian Higgins was best friends with Berkowitz. He had an office. He was an ATF agent who was working out of the Canton police office. So these guys were close. They were all very, very close. And that's important to keep in mind. So even though they were, quote, there was the appearance, they didn't want an appearance of bias or of conflicts of interest. It really was just an appearance. I mean, because Berkowitz is involved at every step of the way. And guess what? Yuri Buchanan tells us, guess who was at the Sallyport basically waiting for them. When that SUV arrived, guess who was at the Sallyport? And we hear this from Yuri Buchanan. He tells us that Chief Berkowitz was at Sallyport when they arrived. He says it, he kind of hesitates, and then he's like, yeah, well, I know I had a conversation with him, which, by the way, just confirms what Miss Devers told us, that Higgins and Berkowitz were seen with the SUV for a really long time, like it was a weirdly long time or something. So that is, again, confirmed by Yuri Buchanan. I mean, it's crazy. Like I said, if you If you pay very careful, close attention, you really have to do that, and it's exhausting. But when you do, they tell you what happened, but you have to listen really carefully, and it's exhausting. It's just an exhausting effort. And also, the interesting too, at this time with the Boston police, because I was trying to figure out, was the commissioner for the Boston PD, was that person involved? The problem was, in January of 2022, the police commissioner in Boston was up for grabs. There were all these temporary people because whoever they had put in that post ends up having to step down very quickly because of involvement with domestic abuse or something. So there really wasn't a commissioner. There was acting commissioners, but there was no official commissioner until Michael Cox comes on, and that's not until August. So it's hard to know what was going on with the Boston PD and who, you'd have to really dig probably to find out who the decision makers were at this time in Boston for the Boston PD, because it's not clear cut.
That would be Mr. Morrissey, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that abnormal for him to be involved in conversations in regard to a police department and any sort of appearance of conflict?
No, it's not abnormal for him to be involved.
And as far as his involvement in his conversations, as far as you're aware, did they evolve, or were they any greater or less than the conversations that you had with Chief Berkowitz?
No, they were the same conversations.
So essentially, a case officer is more of a facilitator.
Love
kind
hearing
of
from Michael.
delegate out tasks, coordinate interviews. The case officer isn't the sole decision maker.
To alleviate any perception, not that one existed, the Canton Police Department recused themselves from being involved in the interview portion of the investigation.
When a homicide comes in, everyone essentially drops what they're doing, and we all work on it together. So it's a collective effort to work on these cases, and essentially the case officer is just kind of the record keeper of all the reports that come in and video that comes in. But when it comes down to decision-making time, it's a group effort.
On January 29th, 2022, at no point in time did I or Michael Proctor, who was with me the whole time, ever respond to 34 Fairview Road.
Now, in addition to Sergeant Mechanic is one of your supervisors within the detective unit, is that correct?
Yes,
And is another one a Lieutenant Brian Tully?
that's correct.
Now, with
Great question, LM. Yes, that is a great question. LM sends $5 and asks about the 1162 key cycle. Good question. So for those of you that were tracking the saga with the key cycles, the short answer is no. And here's what happened. So the 1162 key cycle, for those of you that are following the key cycle drama, what had happened there was Trooper Michael Paul from the first trial alleged that he had taken the Karen Reed's vehicle for testing, and that testing began at key cycle 1165. I believe it was 1165 or 1167. I have to double check. But if that was true, if what Trooper Paul was saying was true, when you worked the key cycles backwards, there's no way that Karen Reed was driving the vehicle at key cycle 1162. That would have been the tow truck driver. So all of us who were very closely following the key cycle saga were up in arms saying there's absolutely no way. I mean, this is so definitive. It would be easy to prove. All you'd have to do is, again, if Trooper Paul had the car during key cycle 1166 or whatever, 1167, and you worked the equation backwards, then there's no doubt Karen Reed did not have possession of that car. Well, as it turns out, and this is what, thank you to somebody, his name was Eric, who helped me via email by digging through, and somebody who was very familiar with telematics and infotainment, essentially discerned that he made a mistake. That what happened in all likelihood is that Trooper Paul screwed up about when he took the car. Because, and I can't remember exactly, I'd have to go back and read you very, very long emails because we went back and forth for a while about this. But the long and short of it is, it appeared that if you were able, and this is the other problem with the telematics, I love how, like, John's family loves to scream and shout about how the telematics, oh my God, that's it. See, she backed up and she definitely did it. The problem with the telematics and infotainment stuff is when you take all these different pieces of data and you try to like line them up, it's very difficult to take data that basically are not meant to be used altogether, especially not when it comes to solving a crime, and make it all make sense. Like, and you saw how like Burgess and Welcher had to dance like over, bend over backwards and dance in circles to figure out how to line up different clocks with the telematics, right? So they're trying to take, I think it was John's cell phone data, GPS data, and then line it up with the GPS from the SUV. So because of all of that, it's really not something that is done often. And I think one of the things that DeSogra was supposed to do in his testimony was help us to understand how unorthodox using this kind of evidence in this manner is. Like, it's not something that happens all the time or that happens at all, really. And that it's very new because, having this kind of really, extensive telematics data is new also. So my understanding is that there is the sentiment that is not, that basically, Trooper Paul made a mistake. Now, the truth is, we don't actually know. I mean, my feeling is I still don't know the answer 100% because when Bob Alessi tried to go there in the trial, the judge shut it down. She would not let him bring the key cycles up. So why wouldn't she? What is the answer here? I don't know. But that was that whole thing about, whether or not Trooper Paul's report was used in Judd Welcher's report. And in the end, she said not enough for them to be able to bring it up. It was bullshit, like everything else the judge decided. But in the end, that's the answer. So we don't really know. The answer is I don't really know. But from what I was told by people who know a lot more about this type of data, that it does appear like it was a mistake on Trooper Paul's behalf, and that Karen did have the car and was driving it during key cycle 1162. But remember, during that key cycle, there was no car accident. There was just backing up. There was a 3-point turn and a backing up event. And it was Karen's admission that she made that 3-point turn that was part of the data that the Welcher and Burgess used to basically link up the events, right? Link up the telematics data with infotainment data, with cell phone data to try to say that this event was Karen Read. So does all of that really, matter? Did it really make sense? Does that really work? I don't know. But that is what I was told. Hopefully that made some sense to you. At the end of the day, the bottom line is it may have very well been an oversight by Trooper Paul, and that was key cycle 1162 was Karen driving. The question for me though is, exactly the telematics data says there was no collision. And I have to believe with the sensitivity of all of this data, if there was a collision, don't we believe that this car would have told us, right? And if you think about it, had that not happened, I mean, they had an SUV, Aperture had an SUV. Wouldn't it have made sense to try to determine with their own SUV that they had possession of whether or not the telematics data registered a car accident if they were driving at 20 miles per hour and hit a crash test dummy, right? That's the kind of thing that you would have thought maybe Aperture would have presented. But, they didn't really do anything, I guess. It's just absurd. I mean, how absurd was Aperture? Like the most absurd thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Yeah, I mean, yeah, just absurd in a way beyond absurd. Not only did Burgess lie and say he was getting a bachelor's degree that he never got for 17 years, which was like the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my entire life. But, John Welcher was paid $400,000 And, very interesting also, by the way, that Hank Brennan continued to try to say over and over again that it was ARCA who was paid to play, right? That was like his big thing, that he was colluding with the defense and that they were paid all this money. It's like, we should all start our own little accident reconstructionist agency, because for 400 grand, I'm sure all of us would have done a much better job, and we don't need degrees in physics, right? Because they didn't, clearly, like Welcher didn't use his degree in physics to do anything. I don't even know if he has a degree in physics, but whatever his degree is in, it clearly was nothing that he used in this accident reconstruction effort, because he did exactly the same thing that any of us could have done. And by the way, I am certain all of us would have done a much better job than Welcher did. What he did was almost unbelievable. It was so ridiculous. Like, when I saw it originally, I couldn't even believe what we were watching, right? I had a sense that it was going to be absurd based on the fact that based on the fact that the response that Alessi had in court in one of the pretrial motions to Welcher's PowerPoint, there was like a tell in there. Something he had said, I was like, oh, this is probably really bad. Like, I expected Welcher to be really bad and really stupid, but I did not expect it to be this bad. I couldn't believe how bad it was. Or maybe it was the ARCA. Maybe it was Dan Wolfe in the voir dire, where Dan Wolfe is like, I don't even, like, he was almost laughing about Welcher's PowerPoint. Something gave it away. So I kind of had the sense that it was going to be really dumb, but I didn't even imagine that the level of stupidity.
Respect
dressing
to
up like John
the
O'Keefe.
one sneaker that was found in Mr. O'Keefe's property. What, if anything, with regard to that, did you communicate to Lieutenant Tully?
Objection.
Let's see here.
As to how it goes to the investigation,
Yes.
I'll allow it.
Sergeant Buchanan and I informed DLT Tully that there was one shoe at the hospital.
And with respect to Detective Lieutenant Tully, are you aware that subsequently in the afternoon, that there was a search that was conducted
so
in the
here's
area?
another moment where Adam Lally, in the middle, and it's just crazy to me, you guys. When I see this, it like hurts my soul because of how messed up this is. So here's Adam Lally, and so he's talking to Proctor, and he does this so intentionally. We're at the very beginning of the day. So in other words, Michael Proctor, early on in the testimony, in his direct questioning with Adam Lally, is recounting the sequence of events. We went to the McCabe residence, then we went to the hospital, and early on, Adam Lally asks, when they're talking about what they saw at the hospital, Adam Lally brings up the taillight and the shoe that the CERT team finds later on. But the way he brings it up, number one, he uses in the afternoon. Did you know about the evidence that the CERT team finds in the afternoon? Well, the CERT team doesn't start in the afternoon. The CERT team doesn't get started until the evening. And the CERT team starts late in the evening, right? In actuality, the CERT team does not begin their search until, in all truth, around 6 p.m. But both Hank Brennan, which I didn't put in here, but both Hank Brennan and Adam Lally make every effort repeatedly to try to insinuate that and confuse the situation, confuse the jury, no doubt on purpose, that by saying that the CERT team investigation happened before the car was in the possession of the police. They do it over and over and over again. It is so unsettling and so upsetting and so just devastating, right? Like, when you see, it's one thing when the cops are doing it, because at this point we've all expected, but when you see Adam Lally, who I just think is the scumbag of the world, I have come to see Adam Lally as like a criminal, like an absolute scumbag criminal who has done everything in his power to obfuscate the truth and to let these people off the hook. He does it over and over and over again in every. And the thing is, with Lally, he was the only attorney on the last trial. So how many witnesses for the prosecution were there? 60? I mean, it was absurd. He was the only guy we heard from. And so on every single occasion, he tries to get around the truth. It's wild. It's so upsetting. It is really, really disgraceful. I wanted to answer a question that came up here. So 2 things. WK, you were asking, why did Jen want Karen Reed to come with her? Great question. I don't know the answer to that. I speculate, this is total speculation based on just a lot of analysis of testimony and Jen McCabe's behavior and words. I think she might have had a thing for John. I think she had a crush on John. That's my personal opinion based on a number of different things that she said, different indicators. But I'm not suggesting there was an affair or anything of that nature going on. I just think that Jen McCabe had a crush on John. Now, whether or not that is significant in any of the events of that night, I have no idea, but that is the hunch that I get about how she felt about him. That makes sense also, by the way. I mean, if you're tracking all of this, Jen McCabe, was helpful to John. She went out of her way, because he was a single dad, to help however she could make life better, easier for him. His, I guess, daughter, niece and one of her daughters were friendly, but he's a much better looking person, number one, than Matt McCabe, certainly. So it's not much of a stretch to imagine that she had a crush on him. So that's number one. Number two, what involvement? Carrie Roberts was a very good friend of John's. So the reason that she gets involved is because Karen, so early on in this morning, this is complicated because Karen Reed is complicated, right? And this was a complicated scenario for her. And you have to really go all the way back to Aruba and really have clear understanding of what the dynamics of the relationship between Karen and John were at this time. So Karen was primarily felt like she was underappreciated by John, that he had a pattern of leaving her to go drink with his buddies, and that in so doing might stumble upon a chick who's hitting on him and get close to her. But she at the same time was also aware that John did not believe that he even had an opportunity to cheat on her, because he never wanted her out of his sight. I don't know if that makes sense, but they were together all the time and he wanted her at his house. He didn't want to go out without her. So Karen kind of knew that he wasn't cheating on her, but got jealous very easily and very quickly. But the main source of tension in their relationship came from her feeling like she was underappreciated, John, and feeling like he used her as a babysitter with benefits. Okay. So the reason Carrie gets involved is because that's one of his best friends. And Karen knows that. So she figures if John, let's say he went to some girl's house and he passed out at that girl's house, Carrie Roberts would know. She would be the person that would know whether or not John was cheating or was at some girl's house, or whether there was another woman. And therefore, she thinks, I'll call Carrie Roberts and find out if she knows anything. So the reason that Carrie gets involved is because she's a close friend of John's. And Karen figures in that morning when she wakes up and realizes John is nowhere to be found, she's the adult in the room kind of, and also close enough to John to know things that she figures she doesn't know. That's why Carrie Roberts gets involved. You know how if you're a guy and you have a girl, if you have a girlfriend, if you are the girlfriend of a man who has a best friend that's a woman, you would assume that that woman best friend who's married, so it's not a physical relationship and you trust that, you would think she might know the things that he doesn't want to tell you, right? That's the way that Karen Reed saw Carrie Roberts, as a confidant to John that would know things that she doesn't know. So if there was another woman, Carrie Roberts would have been the one to know. And she was the adult in the room. She's also responsible, and Karen knew that. That's why Carrie gets involved. So that's why she calls Carrie that morning. And And that was the right call. I mean, because Carrie Roberts, to me, Carrie Roberts is a very different story than Jen McCabe. Like they are, yes, since this event, Jennifer McCabe has gone out of her way to manipulate Carrie, out of her way. But that was not the case before. They didn't even know each other, right? They were not close. Yeah, God, Jennifer McCabe, what a scumbag she really is, right? Yes, Carrie was poisoned by Jen, but I still think when you listen, and I've analyzed Carrie Roberts' statements very closely, Carrie Roberts doesn't think that any of this was on purpose. She doesn't think that Karen Reed intentionally did anything. She does believe there was a car accident, but she thinks that it was involuntary. And she tells us that a number of different ways, a number of different times. And the fact that, this is also really important, the fact that she admits that she did not hear any statement by Karen Reed on that morning saying to Google hypothermia, that was important. That was a really important detail, because that didn't happen is the reason that she didn't hear it, because it didn't happen. So yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line. And yes, she's very close to, yes, Mama Noor, she's, to say that they're friends now would be an understatement. They seem, Jennifer McCabe has done an incredible job of keeping her beyond close. Somebody else had another question. I'll try to dig it back out here and see if I can't find what it was.
34 Fairview Road, where Mr. O'Keefe was found.
Yes.
And are you aware of what, if anything, was recovered in the area where Mr. O'Keefe was found on that day?
Objection.
I'll allow it as to the investigation.
Yes.
And what are you aware of?
We were informed, Sergeant Buchanan and I were informed that CERT team and Detective Lieutenant Tully discovered a black Nike sneaker with the white swoosh logo that was a match to Mr. O'Keefe's shoe at the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Now, from
and that's really interesting to me as they're going through. It's interesting about Proctor, and I've done analysis of him and his testimony that I've not released, but it's interesting that Proctor looks worried throughout this as he's recounting this out of sequence information about the CERT team and when that CERT team, evidence actually, something he became aware of. He looks completely anxious, and that's interesting. Like, if you note, Brian Tully never looks anxious. Brian Tully never looks scared, right? Brian Tully always looks like, he's in control, in command, extraordinarily arrogant, but not Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor looks nervous, and that's interesting to me. Very interesting.
I'm sorry, let me just look. Trooper, in addition to the
also Buchanan never looks
that you,
nervous either.
Already referenced, what, if anything else, did you observe about what kind of clothing and the condition of the clothing that you observed in the hospital?
The clothing seemed, it was wet. It was pretty well saturated. The right sleeve had some like cuts to it, like tears to it. There's like blood and vomit on it, if I recall. Those were the observations I had made of the clothing. And they had been cut due to rendering first aid as well, the pants area.
Now, subsequent to viewing these clothing items at the hospital at a later time, did you have occasion to observe surveillance video from a variety of places on the evening of January 28th into the early morning of January 29th depicting Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you note with regard to the clothing that you observed at the hospital and the clothing that you observed in the video?
So the videos I reviewed at C.F. McCarthy's bar and the Waterfall bar were the same clothes Mr. O'Keefe was wearing that Sergeant Buchanan and I had secured at Good Samaritan Hospital.
Now, Trooper, I'm going to ask you some questions just in regard to securing these items specifically as evidence, but in general terms as far as securing items and evidence within your unit. How is that accomplished? How is that done? What do you do with items that you deem of evidentiary value that you then secure?
Generally, if we take an item for evidence, we'll put it in a brown paper bag, document it, time, date, who secured that item, address, where it's discovered, and then we'll bring that back to our office, to the evidence processing area. From there, it'll go to a permanent evidence room.
Oh, yeah.
That
So, Film Freak, you're asking about the sirens. Yeah, those are 100% for the cops. So, and we find that out because Brian Tully is such an arrogant jackass. I will show you one of my next videos. You'll see it. I'll bring it back. But Brian Tully gives it away because in the middle of his testimony, there's a bunch of sirens, and he tells us what it's all about. He has this like very proud moment where the whole trial has to stop because of the sirens, and he has this overwhelmingly revealing response to tell us, that it's for them. So every time you hear a siren in the middle of this trial, you can safely say, if a cop is testifying, it is like a signal to the cop that they're there supporting them. So when you hear it, that's why, by the way. I mean, think about how small this town is, right? I mean, I don't know if you've been past the courthouse in Dedham, but there's nothing happening there ever. It's a tiny little community. It's not New York City. But if you didn't know any better, you would think it's New York City because of all the sirens. Well, the sirens also conveniently only occur when the cops are testifying, number one. And number two, right, they're countless. And you'll see if you watch very, very closely, a lot of the time they'll react, like they'll be like a little smirk, right? But each time you hear any of those sirens, 100%, when a cop is testifying, it's for them, 100%. And you, like I said, you'll see it. I'll post it again in my next video about the taillight. You'll see it very clearly because Brian Tully gives it away. He just gives it away 100%. It's disgusting. When I first caught it, it was completely by accident. I was analyzing Brian Tully for some other reason. I happened to look up and just see his reaction and almost fell out of my chair. I could not believe it. I was like, are you kidding?
That is, has triple retention. It has an actual key, a key card, and an actual access code. And only 3 members of my office have access to that room. The 2 evidence officers and Detective Lieutenant Tully.
And at this time, on January 29th, 2022, who was assigned as the evidence officers who had access to that room?
So that'd be Trooper David DeChico.
Yeah, this is interesting, by the way. Yeah, I mean, it's not always just cops, but it's definitely a signal to when the cops are testifying, 100%. It's a signal to them. Like I said, you can see it. You can see it on their faces. You can see it on, go back and watch Tully. He's only testifies once. So this is interesting, right? Because in both trials, the Commonwealth makes a point to try to say that the evidence area, right? There's 2 different evidence areas. One of them is very secure. There's only the evidence officers have access. But then we find out who the evidence officers are. Okay. In addition to Brian Tully, it's David DeChico and Jeff Krakowski. These 2 guys that are also on the text thread with Michael Proctor as he's talking about the retarded client and how much he hates David Yannetti and that there's no nudes so far, right? So it's like these fucking people, man. It's just like, seriously? So you think that David DeChico wouldn't give Michael Proctor whatever endless access to the evidence that he wanted, or wouldn't even need to do that because DeChico could just throw some taillight pieces on, in the bag with the shirt. No big deal, right? Of course. Like, you just start to realize that all these people are like in on the joke, right? Like this whole office is just like as corrupt as they get. And Fanning, yes. Thanks, Maria, for bringing that up. Fanning is another one. And I think DeChico has some involvement in the Birchmore case, although it's distant. I think he also has some involvement too. But yeah, Fanning is big time involved in the Birchmore case. Yeah. It's insane. It's just insane. again, it never ends. It's just like the constant insanity with these cops, and obviously we know that this particular group of cops, the DA's office, the detective investigators that work for the Norfolk County DA, those guys are just bad news, all of them, right? And since this trial, a lot of these guys have been dispersed. Like, for example, my understanding is that Brian Tully no longer works at this office, however, is still 100% involved, was 100% involved with everything Karen Read and now everything Aidan Carney. So where he goes to work every day, who the hell knows? But, he's still around these parts, right? The Karen Read and Aidan Carney stuff.
And Trooper Jeffrey Kukowski.
Yeah, so
Now, as far as the drive from Good Samaritan,
And yes.
that's in Brockton, is that correct?
there's some questions about the shoe going around, and what I would say about that is that's on my next list of, or it's on the list. I don't know if it's next, but it's on the list of what I'm going to investigate next is what's the deal with the shoe, right? Because obviously, I'm sure everybody in the chat, we all have heard that there's controversy. There were 2 left shoes or 2 right shoes or whatever shoes ended up in the courtroom was, not the actual shoe, whatever the case is. There is something up with the
Yes.
shoe, and
As
bottom
far
line
as the
is
drive
I
from the
plan
Good
to
Samaritan in Brockton
investigate
to
that
the defendant's parents' home in Dayton, about how long a drive was that, and how would you describe the weather conditions along the way?
Question.
Yeah, with the weather conditions were whiteout, high winds, blizzard conditions. We had to travel very slow.
Tess, you might not want to know the answer to that question. I'm just telling you, you may not want to hear the answer to that one.
It was almost about an hour to get there.
And at some point, did members of the Dayton police come along and join?
Yes.
And do you recall who those people were?
I believe one of the officers' last name was Barrios.
How long have you worked for the Dayton Police Department, sir?
Since 2011.
And what's your position there currently?
Currently, I am a sergeant.
I want to draw your attention to January of 2022, a few years ago. January 29th, 2022.
Around 2:30 in the afternoon, I received a call from the troopers assigned to the Norfolk District County DA's office in regards to a vehicle that was at a residence in the town of Dayton.
What were you asked to do? Why did you get that call?
The troopers said that they were coming into my jurisdiction, and as a courtesy, they wanted me.
Somebody's asking, so Tess, you're asking about what was the intent of Karen Read as it relates to Brian Higgins? I think is essentially the question. To put it nicely, probably most people don't want to hear the answer to that question, right? But having done a very thorough analysis of the text thread between Brian Higgins and Karen Read multiple times, and including the extra 50 text messages that were added that we didn't get the first trial, that we got the second trial, because for whatever reason, Adam Lally left a bunch out. And by the way, watching Yuri Buchanan read these was just hilarious. By the end, because I just happened to be watching live and analyzing Yuri Buchanan in real time during that exact day during the trial, I was like almost peeing my pants by the end of it, because when you really listen to Yuri Buchanan, he starts to get into it and like adds inflection, and it's just the absurdity of listening to him reading these texts. It was just too much. By the end of it, I just couldn't even handle it. It was hilarious. But the long and short of it is, yes. The answer is yes. Yes. Was Karen interested enough in Brian Higgins to have and pursue a sexual relationship? Yep. Yes, she was. Yep. I know nobody wants to hear me say that, so I try not to emphasize it very often, because everyone's like, no, he's gross. I get it. But she was, absolutely. And had he made a move, she would have. But he didn't make a move. And he didn't make a move because, despite anything he tells you, he actually liked her. He actually liked her. He liked her. He liked her. And he really liked her. Like, he did not want to just have a fling with her, and he liked her. Yeah. Yep. Why? Well, here's what I will say. If people are asking why. A number of reasons. So number one, there's a lot of alcohol going on. And I think when you hear Karen talk about that time in her life, she said, I think on The Body in the Snow or at some point, that the thing that she is, welcome Snugbug 176, the thing that she is like the most regretful of of all is how much drinking she was doing at that time. Now, because I am, one of my very initial areas of expertise is substance abuse. So I'm very intimately familiar with substance abuse. The truth is that people tend to think that, how do I want to put this? I'm trying to think carefully how to say this. So people tend to think that when you take a substance, what matters is the moment that you ingest that substance, right? So let's say we go out on a Friday night and we all get wasted. We don't tend to think that on Monday, that Friday night binge episode that we all just did is going to affect us because the alcohol is out of our system. So we think, well, but it's, I already paid the price. I got hungover. It's Monday. That stuff is long gone. But in actuality, that's not true at all. What happens on Monday is there's rebound anxiety. Whenever you use mood-altering substances, there's a back-end price. You may not know it, and you may never associate any anxiety you feel about how much you hate Monday or the case of the Mondays. You may never connect your anxiety Monday mornings to Friday night's, drinking episode, but they are always connected, and they are connected because of the effects. I mean, alcohol, I'm not judging anybody who drinks alcohol. Please understand that. But it is the most toxic mood-altering substance that we have. Body hates alcohol. It is an absolute poison, and it affects every organ system, every major organ system in the body. So when you take a mood-altering substance, doesn't matter which one, by the way, I'm not just singling out alcohol. I'm only doing that because that's what Karen Reed was using. When you take that kind of drug, though, and you do it regularly, let's say you only drink 3 days a week, but you drink quite a bit. Say you have 4 or 5 plus drinks 3 days a week. Well, what happens? You think, I don't drink that much. I just drink 3 days a week. Okay, well, 3 days a week of, 4 plus drinks is going to affect you every day, every single day of the week. Not just on the days that you drink, but on the days that you don't drink. And in some cases, I could make an argument even more so, because those are the moments when you're not drinking or not actually under the influence, when your body is trying to get rid of the alcohol, that you're experiencing what we call rebound anxiety. So your mood tanks, you're grumpy, you're negative, you're like you have low frustration tolerance, no patience, exactly the way that, let's say you're hungry, like you haven't had lunch and you start to get hungry and you get cranky. That's exactly what people who drink routinely experience when they're not drinking in between drinking episodes. As somebody was mentioning in the chat earlier about Brian Albert and Nicole Albert being a battered woman, what I will tell you about Brian Albert is I believe Brian Albert is probably an alcoholic. Now, I'm only using the phrase alcoholic because that's what people understand. I could use the technical term, which is, substance use disordered, but it's sort of, you're not a room full of, clinical professionals. So it's stupid to say that. But you have to understand that, and this is not an excuse, it's just an explanation, right? When somebody is alcohol or substance use disordered, they are not the same person they would be when they're not alcohol or substance use disordered. They're completely different. So it changes everything. Like, again, people tend to think that if you have an alcohol use problem, alcohol is the problem. That's not really true, right? Alcohol may have once been the problem, but if you're at the point where you have a substance use disorder, you have a new problem now, and it isn't alcohol. Your problem is that you have what we would call an alcohol use disorder, which means that your brain and body has completely changed how it operates to make room to adjust to the chronic use of substances. That's what it means to be a substance use disordered. When somebody is an alcoholic or a drug addict, what is actually happening is their body has made a calculated decision to change how it operates normally
because of the substance. That's why I stopped working in substance use, because it's so predictable. Like working with people in early recovery or working with people who have a substance use disorder is the most painful experience, because it's so predictable. I don't know how else to say it, but it's very predictable. And it comes with a set of thoughts and emotions and behaviors that are just very predictable. So to me, Brian Albert appears to be like a textbook alcoholic. That's just the way he comes across in every way, shape, and form. And my guess is if he's not drinking, he's probably a funny person to be around. But when he is drinking, he's probably the world's biggest asshole. And that would explain why Nicole Albert, when he's drinking and he's an asshole, he's probably the world's biggest asshole. And when he's not, and he, goes through his whatever periods, he's probably, I guess a halfway decent, maybe even fun person or whatever. That's my guess. Again, I'm just going off the cuff. I've not put any time or effort into it. I see somebody saying, John, I think, are we talking about somebody being in recovery? I think we are. Whoever that person is, that's amazing. I see it. I see all the things, but I can't see who the original person was. So whoever that person is, good for you. Not easy to do. Certainly, if you, have an alcohol or substance use disorder or know someone who does, it is not a fun thing to have. It is one of the worst, in my opinion. It is. I can't tell you how many people I've lost to substance use disorders, more people than I could possibly count. So over the years, right? Because I'm an old lady at this point. So, and actually, the other thing I would want to say about this case is, to me, alcohol and, I guess substance use disorder is all over this. Colin Albert, Chris Albert, Brian Albert. You could even make the argument at this time, Karen Reed is abusing substances way too much. You could make the argument that John O'Keefe shows a lot of evidence of having tendencies towards substance use disorders. Like everybody in this story, certainly Paul O'Keefe, who's wasted on the stand during the first trial, so much so that I started watching Paul O'Keefe's testimony in the first trial recently, and I stopped because he's so drunk. Like you can't even listen to a word he says. It's just absurd. But that is so significant, you guys. I can't stress to you how important it is when we're talking about everything that happened that night, because alcohol affects your brain. The thing that most people really don't understand about addiction is that when you're it's like you're a different person. Like every time you drink. So think about any time you ever drank, like done a shot of tequila, like at a party, or taken a Valium or an Ambien, any drug, any mood altering substance, smoked weed, whatever it is. Every time you return to that substance, it's the same experience to your brain. So it's familiar, right? It's like, oh, I know this. And you kind of, it's almost like you adopt a personality that is identical to the substance you're taking, but that personality is distinctly different from the person that you are when you're sober. And the problem with a substance use disorder is that you become like multiple personalities. You're one person under the influence of whatever drug. You're one person under the influence of a mix of drugs, let's say alcohol and marijuana together. But then you're also a different person 2 days after you've had any substances, because that's a different neurochemistry 2 days out than you would be 5 days out. So what ends up happening to somebody who has a substance use disorder is that you will experience them maybe like Jekyll and Hyde, or maybe like Jekyll and Hyde and Jane and whoever, like, you have like 15 different personalities and you don't know which one is really you. So one day you wake up, you're like, I want to live in France. The next day you wake up, you're like, I want to, what am I, crazy? I would never want to live in France. I hate the weather there. The next day you want to move to Florida. The next day you love your wife. The next day you hate your wife. You're just nuts because your chemistry is always changing and you don't know that. You don't realize that's what's happening. And it's a horrible, addiction is a horrible thing to have. It just really, really is. So, but that's the point, right?
And there are different levels. Like not everybody who drinks, just because you drink doesn't mean you have a substance use disorder. I mean, this is very nitty gritty, technical, scientific kind of garbage that, people like me have to know because I deal with these things in nuance, but most people do not ever have to really understand in great detail. But there are very, very big differences between someone, like if you have a genetic predisposition for an alcohol use disorder, that is very different than somebody who drinks a lot. Like they could not be more distinctly different because genetics can, not always, but can play a really big role. Yeah. And by the way, we also know that what killed Kaylee and Patrick's father was a drug overdose. I can't believe I didn't know that. I feel like when I was in Dedham for the verdict, I felt like I was the only person in the world that didn't already know that, but I didn't. I had no idea that that Kaylee and Patrick's father, right? So I knew that John O'Keefe's sister died of a brain tumor. I did not know that. I thought he had died of a heart attack. I did not know that he actually died from a drug overdose. And that was terrifying. That was horrible to learn. Not surprising, but horrible to learn. Very, very sad. Yeah. Yes, Lori, that came out in Hank Brennan brought it out. And I forget, I think it was in something to do in some place around the text message testimony that came out from Michael Proctor's friend. Somewhere in there, it came out that he overdosed. So it was Hank that revealed it during the trial. That's how I learned about it. But again, I didn't even catch it in real time. Yes. So the husband died of a overdose. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is that true? I didn't even know that, but it's a terrible, terrible story. Terrible story. He died of a drug overdose. Yeah, it's a terrible story. Terrible, terrible. All right, so we're almost getting to the part that I need your guys' help with, and I
Is that
really
sort of normal protocol if you go into somebody else's jurisdiction?
I can't believe I've never done this before.
Yes.
I don't know why.
So that was
Sometimes,
not necessarily unusual.
with this case, there's so much.
About what time
information gets
did you
tossed
receive that
through it
first
all.
call? The first call was around 2:30 in the afternoon.
Was there logged?
Somebody's asking, are people allergic? Good question. Hold on, I'm trying to find Waylon. I saw your question, Waylon, and it goes quick. Let me see if I can find that question again. Somebody's asking, can people be allergic to alcohol? Well, the real answer to that is it depends on how you define allergy. So in Alcoholics Anonymous, which was the AA big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was written in like 1939, talks about alcoholism as an allergy. And you could use that metaphor. It does work. So you could use the metaphor of alcoholism as an allergy, but technically it's more like some people who have a genetic predisposition to abuse alcohol become addicted very quickly. Now, why does that person become addicted? There's a lot of different theories about which genetic predispositions would lend themselves to somebody being addicted. For example, just to give you a very quick example, let's say that you are somebody who has a combination of genes such as it takes more to make you feel happy, and you are more prone to impulsive decision making. Okay. So if you're impulsive and you are like generally like a little bit more of like a dysthymic temperament, that might be a predisposition where alcohol would be a relief to you in a way that it might not be, and I'm talking about neurochemically, to somebody else. So you could make the argument that there's a genetic predisposition in terms of temperament that makes it so that when you take a mood altering substance, you feel relief, whereas somebody else feels sick And all they do is feel sick, and they're like, ew, I feel out of control. I feel sick. I want nothing to do with that. I'm never drinking again. Whereas somebody else has the exact same experience, but they say, oh, I finally feel like a human being. I'm not anxious. I don't feel miserable, right? And so that person is more likely to go on to, because it was validating, it was a positive experience, that person is more likely to drink, heavily, right? Because it was a good experience. It was a validating experience. It was rewarding. It was a rewarding experience. However, that's one example of how you might say that there's a predisposition for someone who has a substance use disorder. And that's true, scientifically true. There are also examples or situations where if you are, like I've worked with, let's say, people who's just like their parents, their grandparents, everybody that, they can point to directly in their immediate family lineage had an alcohol use disorder. I've worked with like 17-year-old women, young ladies, who could drink a liter of vodka and just not even look drunk. Just not even, they were just walking around, where it's like alcohol just was not processed exactly the same way for them as it would be for somebody else. Perhaps it's because it was less toxic somehow, because their body was just able to process that alcohol much more easily. It was easier for them to tolerate it. It wasn't considered, wasn't as overwhelming, or they didn't get sick from it in the same way. The exact specifics of why and which genes are really under a source of great debate and controversy. But there's no question that if you are one of those folks that, can point to a long history, that presentation of an alcohol use disorder is very different from somebody who does not have that. Like, in other words, I can tell you when I'm working with somebody who has that genetic predisposition and somebody who does not. They're so clearly different. Very, very different. Yeah. Okay, wait. Here we go. Sorry. I was trying to get to you. Sam, you're so amazing. I appreciate you have built this incredible community. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you, Lib, Mr. Dachshund. Thank you so much for your $5 contribution. So much fun to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Are logs kept?
I'm
of those
getting
kinds
to
of
the
things?
moment
If you
where
get a
I
call, you respond to location?
really need your
Yes.
guys' eyes.
I got a
and
second
your
call
knowledge, and
around
I know
3
you're gonna know
p.m.
the answer to these questions.
From Trooper Michael Proctor stating that he was about 10 minutes away from the address in Dighton.
Okay, and remember the
What time did
timeline
you-
here. So I love Sergeant Barros also, not just because he's great and honest and wonderful, but also because he helps us with the timeline. He tells us, I showed up at the Reed residence at like 3:20, right? Okay, great. So the tow truck was coming around 3:30, and by the time they leave this residence, it's like 4:30. And that is honest. Like, we can trust that, right? So we have an honest human being telling us exactly when he arrives at William Reed's house, exactly when that tow truck leaves the house. Thank God for this man, because you might remember initially Proctor lies about the timing of when that car comes back from Canton on all of the reports. Now, I can't remember. I'd have to go digging to find out exactly what the time he said was, but I know that he initially lies and says that it's later, so that, again, it looks like it's impossible for that taillight to have made it back to the SERP team investigation in time for them to have found it, right? That's the whole point of all of this, is to try to make it seem like somehow the taillight got there before the state
at the residence.
had control of the vehicle.
I arrived at the residence, I believe it was 3:27 p.m.
I love how cops
Sergeant
give
Barros,
exact
did you-
time. They
I
give
don't
like
want the
exact
address.
time.
Cameras are rolling. Did you respond specifically to a residence in the city of Dighton?
Yes,
Did you at that time know who lived at that residence, who resided there?
I did.
How did you know that?
Early in the shift, when I came on at 8 a.m., the midnight shift, the outgoing shift, had told me that a resident of Dighton at that address had called looking for a ride to Brockton Hospital.
Who did you know at that time, or who did you believe at that time to live at the address that you are now responding to?
William Reed.
That was Reed, R-E-A-D?
Correct.
Okay. Did you know anything about his daughter at that time, or did you just know the name William Reed?
I just knew William Reed, the name.
At the time that Michael Proctor called you, did he say anything about what his intentions were once he arrived at the location?
Yes, his intention was to retrieve a vehicle that he said was involved in a homicide.
Did he specifically say to you at 3 o'clock-ish in the afternoon he intended to seize the vehicle?
I believe the first phone call, that was his intention.
Meaning all the way back to 2:30?
2:30 is when he first called me and said that they were coming to Dighton to retrieve a vehicle that occurred in a homicide in Canton.
And you understood that to mean what? Retrieve a vehicle?
Seize.
Thank you.
My role was Trooper Michael Proctor asked me to facilitate a tow, to tow that vehicle. As I arrived and I parked my cruiser at the end of the driveway, I observed a black Lexus SUV in the driveway.
This is the afternoon of January 29th, 2022, correct?
Correct.
Before the vehicle had been seized formally by Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Buchanan, correct?
Correct. There was, it was damaged, the taillight was damaged, but there was a crack missing, but it was not completely damaged. A piece was missing. The piece was about maybe this big.
Sergeant
What's
Barrows.
really interesting about this that I don't think has really come up about the way that Barrows describes the piece missing. It's exactly or very similar to how Carrie Roberts first talks about the piece that was missing, right? Remember how in her description, and this might have been from the first trial, she talks about how she was worried that somebody would get clipped on it, that like their shirt would get caught on it because they would, when they walk past it. And it's interesting because that looks a whole lot like this piece here, which is exactly the same piece that Barrows points to say, oh, yeah, that's the piece that was really missing is this piece right here. But the whole taillight cover was still on, right? And again, that matches what Carrie Roberts told us too. And barring the involvement that she has with Jen McCabe and the whole timeline nonsense, you know, Carrie, to me, is the more honest human being in this story. Absolutely. It's interesting. I wonder, I've heard this now, Coffee Crime Crane, you also mentioned that Proctor said it. Somebody else just mentioned it to us about the drug overdose on her grave. Where was that in the texts? Like, I'd have to go back and look. Where was that in the sequence of Proctor's texts? He's just, like, what an asshole. Both Brennan and Proctor really are. Like, why would Proctor, you know, like, who's Proctor to be telling this to his fucking first grade buddies? Excuse my language. It was just horrible. This is a horrible thing, right? I mean, do you want, I don't know. It's just a terrible thing. And somebody was asking if that's the first time the kids found out. My understanding is it is the first time the kids found out. I don't know that for sure, but that's my understanding, that it is the first time the kids found out. Yes. So absolutely. There's, yes, of course, there's a lot more alcoholism among Irish than, you know, than in the rest of really Europe, or really, I want to say almost anywhere, right? Which is interesting. I mean, even to this day, there's a lot of alcoholism. You know, I'm not judging. I'm just stating a fact. There are a lot of drinking is a part of the culture also in Ireland. It is a, you know, look, drinking is a part of the culture too. And, you know, in Italy, you know, it's a part of the culture in a lot of places, but certainly in Russia too. I've worked with some folks, some Russian folks, like actually from Russia, Russian folks, and they love their vodka, right? So alcohol can be, you know, can be a part of, can be a huge staple in cultures. But to your point about the Irish, yes, it is. Alcoholism really is very, very common amongst the Irish. And in Canton, which was a town that was largely settled by South Boston natives, which was the Irish, Canton, this community is notorious for alcohol being a staple part of the community. People walk around carry into, bars and restaurants, like a bag of those little nip bottles, like the little shot bottles. Like, someone will open up their purse and have all those little nip bottles, right? So that's not an uncommon phenomenon to the town of Canton. And again, not surprising, it is settled. It was settled by the Irish. It was settled by the Irish community. So it makes a lot of sense. All right, we're going to try. I'm going to get through this.
Is this the condition of the right rear taillight when you showed up at the Reed household at around 3:15 in the afternoon on January 29th, 2022?
Absolutely not.
Love that, of course.
That taillight is completely smashed out. That middle section was intact when I was there. Towards that right side where that large chunk is, that's what was missing.
We moved my cruiser and Trooper Boussolet's cruiser at 5:20.
Okay, this guy is interesting. Kevin O'Hara, head of the CERT team. Normally, he would be in charge of this investigation. This is so important to remember. This guy would normally be the one when there's a CERT team investigation. And by the way, homicides is not typically what these guys are doing. They are almost always doing like missing person investigations. So it's interesting that the crime, like they weren't the crime scene people, they were the CERT team people, which, I mean, that's probably something you could investigate by itself. Why Brian Tully would have, maybe him and O'Hara are old buddies, I don't know, but why they would want this guy and his group on site and not the crime scene tech people, I don't know. Because of the snow, I don't know. But for whatever reason, this guy, Kevin O'Hara, is telling us exactly when everybody gets to the scene to start the search that happens at 34 Fairview later in the day on the 29th.
Started gridding off where we wanted to search, but at 5:20, that's when we moved our cruisers to put the headlights on. That's right. Trooper Bearden and the two sergeants arrived quickly after on scene, so by 5:24, we started. All five of us were lined up shoveling. When the two other members arrived on scene, they just joined in on the line to help us move. Just prior to my arrival, one member arrived at 4:54 p.m. It was Trooper Jason Boussolet.
Did you wait until the entire team was there before you began?
No, we did not. Trooper Blake Bearden arrived at 5:21 p.m. Sergeant Charles Luis arrived at 5:24 p.m. Sergeant Michael O'Brien arrived at 5:24 p.m. Trooper Scott Viscardi arrived at 5:34 p.m. and Sergeant Anthony Carrier arrived at 5:41 p.m.
All right, so here's what we know. We know they were not on the line shoveling at 5:24 because if these guys arrived at 5:24, they were not also side by side shoveling at 5:24. So I think you can safely say the last guy arrives at 5:45. They're probably not all side by side and actually, doing their thing until closer to 5:45 than 5:24. Why in God's name this guy is trying to move the timeline up? Geez, I don't know. You be the judge, right? And Waylon, thank you so much for your super sticker. I so much appreciate your support and thank you so much for being here with us. So this is the important time, right? Because now we're getting down to the nitty gritty and we're hearing from this guy who's not a part. This guy's not part of the Massachusetts State Police. I don't know exactly whether he is, but he's not a part of, I don't know who his big bosses are. What I know is he's not a part of the Norfolk County DA's detective unit. He might be Massachusetts State Police, but he's at a completely different group, agency, whatever. I'm not sure who exactly searched where they came from exactly. I'd have to look that up.
January 29, 2022. About what time is it that you arrive in the area of 34 Fairview?
About 5:30.
And had yourself or any members of your unit, to your knowledge, been at 34 Fairview at any point in time prior to your arrival there that day?
No.
Objection.
We followed the tow truck.
Here it is, you guys. So this is the mirrored video of the Sallyport. Now, what you're going to see, there are approximately 3 or 4 people in this video. One of them, I want to know who you guys think it is. We have to figure out who this person is, okay? It's so important. It is just so, I cannot explain how important it is, but it is so important that we figure out who this guy is. Now, you'll see as we watch this video, which goes on for a while, there are some cops, some Canton cops that are like cleaning up around the Sallyport. Also, I want to point out that when we see this car pull in, you'll notice that around the car, it already looks as though that car has been there, right? Because there's snow all around the outside. So that's weird. Did they literally like drive this car in and then pull it out and then drive it back in just to make it look like and then run the video? I mean, who the hell knows? That's, I guess, a possibility. The car had already been there by then. I don't know. But it is a little weird that there is snow all around the car as though the car had already been there when it pulls up. And it's allegedly supposed to be coming off the tow truck. So pay attention to that. Also pay attention to the cops. Already in this video, you'll see there's a guy in a hood on the back behind the right taillight. Look carefully because you'll see some heads moving around behind there. And see if you can, number one, figure out how many people are back there. And number two, who are they? Who is who in this video? That is the $1 million question that we really have to figure out. So we're going to pay close attention.
The address in Dayton to the Canton Police Department were secured in the Sallyport Bay.
And if you know approximately what time was it that you arrived at the Canton Police Department and secured the defendant's vehicle in the Sallyport Bay?
Yep, so we left Dayton around 4:16 p.m. and arrived in Canton at the police department at approximately 5:31 p.m.
And with reference to the Canton Police Department's Sallyport garage, why was the vehicle taken there?
I wasn't part of that decision, but it's my understanding that it was a heated facility. The other options were, I believe,
who the hell is
the
that?
barracks in Milton, but that's not large enough to house a vehicle that size, and it's not heated.
And in regard to the heated, what was the sort of purpose or utility of storing it in a heated setting?
All right, so right now it looks to me like there are 3 people back here, right? There's a guy in a baseball cap that's hard to see right now. Then there's these 2 guys who have like black hood, black, I don't know, what are those hats called? Like wool hats of some kind that are kind of covered up a lot more. So these guys have clearly been out in the elements or whatever. They're kind of covered up. But then there's a person in like jeans and a baseball cap behind the taillight now. He's going to come out so we can see him better. Who is that? It's a really important question. So take a close look.
Miss Reed's vehicle was covered with snow and ice at the time it was transported from Dayton to Canton.
And with regard to the Sallyport garage area of the Canton Police Department, at some point were you inside that area?
Yes.
And what, if any, observations did you make as far as the temperature or the heating within that facility?
I don't remember the exact.
So see, there's 3
I couldn't
heads
put like a
behind the
ballpark
taillight.
on temperature, but it was certainly warmer than
This guy here with the jeans and this hat on, who is that?
outside.
Now, as far as the vehicle was concerned, either on scene, either in
He's
Dayton,
shaking hands with everybody?
or at the Sallyport garage, or at any point in time that you were in the presence of that vehicle.
Who is that?
What, if any, contact did you have? What, if anything, did you do or observe Sergeant Mechanic to do with regard to that damaged area you described on the right rear passenger side?
Yeah. Sergeant Mechanic and I never touched any part of that vehicle.
Yeah. Who is that guy? That is the question. So it's not Proctor. Proctor has one of the wool hats on. So he's one of the other guys. I think I'm not exactly sure. This guy right there. Who is that? Is that Buchanan? Not Brian Albert. It is like, where's Waldo? Yeah. So my question is, two possibilities. Now, remember, we know that Berkowitz is on site, and it could very well be him. Could be. The other possibility, Brian Higgins is also, by the way, in the building, but I don't think it's him. Brian Higgins is bigger, so we would be able to tell. This guy is tall, but he's thin. He's small. And also, by the way, Berkowitz is short. So my question is, could be Kevin, could be. Does that look like Brian Tully? That is an important question. That's the question that we need answered. Does that look like it could be Brian Tully? If it's Brian Tully, that is a really important piece of information. Now, remember, Buchanan and Proctor are approximately around the same height, right? Like they're about the same height. I don't know how tall Brian Tully is. That would be an important question to ask. But what does it look like? Does that look like, does it look like somebody else that you know that's part of this group? That's really the question. Yeah, I know. So can you tell if he's a bald guy? I mean, it's really tough to tell, but I feel like you can kind of tell which one is Proctor, right? I mean, you can kind of tell from their movements. So I'm looking again. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go deep diving through microdots to find out. I'm gonna have to, because now I need to know who that is. I mean, I need to know if that's Brian Tully. That is, when I tell you it couldn't be more critical, we have to know who that is. If it's Brian Tully, then we have Brian Tully on, like evidence that he is not at the CERT team at 5:30. He is standing next to Karen Reed's SUV, which essentially not only disproves what he's telling us, but also proves that he was standing next to her taillight. Like, who is that guy? It really, like, to me, it looks like it absolutely could be Brian Tully, but I don't know. Maybe I'm delusional, right? Maybe I'm too knee deep in this to see it clearly. That's really the question. I think we have Proctor here, and then Buchanan would be the other guy in, well, so what, we have 4 guys, right? There's 4 guys now. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 guys. Right? This one I think is Proctor. Very tough. Very tough to say. Is there a woman? Is there a woman in here? Back up. Did you see the overlap of the guy in the front? Yeah, I'll back up.
Try to set up a perimeter as best we could using caution tape.
Yeah, I mean, there's some weird stuff happening. You know, people disappear and then reappear. So, you know, it's very tough to trust any of this. And I've looked at it in the past for that reason, just for continuity's sake.
I never touched any part of that vehicle.
But now I'm so focused on trying to figure out who the hell is in this video. I don't know. For a while, I started thinking maybe that is Buchanan, but I don't know. Yeah, that little weird, whatever that, like, you know, smear thing was in the, you know, where he's like invisible and then visible again. And it's very weird. It's like appearing and reappearing. Yeah, who's this guy behind the guy with the hat? Because this right here, this guy could be Buchanan. Because I believe that they are closer in height. I don't think that Yuri Buchanan towers over Michael Proctor. I don't know. But it's a really, really important question.
We try to set up a perimeter as best we could using caution tape and just kind of sectioned it off.
Very tough. Very, very tough. Yes, exactly. Buchanan, Berkowitz, and Proctor are a little shorter. So that's tough. And yeah, I mean, any video that is related to the police in this case is tough to trust. I mean, certainly, the defense is like still asking for video that they never got. That is a dummy. This person, this thing in the middle is a dummy. But this is such an important detail because if that is Brian Tully, and in this video, it looks like it absolutely could be, if that is Brian Tully, who is, by the way,
we had a debrief meeting
in and around the Canton Police Department before, by his own admission, and after the tail light is discovered at 34 Fairview. He tells us he's there before and after. But he tells us that at 5:30, he's on site at 34 Fairview. So if that is him, that's really critical because not only does it dispute the reality that he is telling us he's at 34 Fairview at that time, it is also clear evidence that he's standing next to the taillight in question. And by the way, not sure if you know this, but he is also the guy that discovers the taillight pieces on site at the search, during the search. It is Tully, or it's one of Tully's guys. It's very funny, actually. There's this whole interaction, and you'll see it in the video when I present it in the next few days. There's a whole interaction where like Hank Brennan is trying to get Kevin O'Hara from the CERT team to say that the scene was secure and that nobody infiltrated the scene. There was no strangers walking around it. And instead, O'Hara's like, oh, no, there's like 10 guys with Tully. And I don't know. I don't know who they were. And, like one of them I recognize, but there's like 2,500 people in our department. So I don't know half the guys. I mean, it's quite funny because it just makes Brennan look terrible. Anytime Brennan looks terrible, it's funny. But so basically what we find out from Kevin O'Hara is that, oh yeah, there's a lot of people wandering around the scene, right? So it doesn't make you feel a hell of a lot more secure or safe knowing that there's a bunch of random strangers running around during this very moment when we are trying to figure out who found the taillight and where did they find it and who was there, right? But it turns out that taillight was, I mean, you can't make it up. Of course it was. Of course it was Brian Tully that found the taillight, right? I mean, right? Like, of course it was. Of course. Who else would it be? And somebody was bringing this up earlier about the pictures in this case. Not only do they not take good pictures, they also don't take pictures like you're supposed to in a crime scene that are in context. Like you're supposed to have pictures that indicate how far wherever the evidence that you found is from other very specific markers in that image, right? So like, for example, okay, I found a piece of taillight. It's this big, and the taillight was this far from the fire hydrant, right? But they never do that. It's wild. They never do it. Never. Okay. Or hold on a second. I can't see this because there's like a little bar in the way. Are the only known photos of video of Tully or Berkowitz from anywhere that night? Yeah, it's a great question. It is a great question, and thank you so much for sending in $4.99. I've been looking. So there is a news video. There was a news team, Channel 4, was on site at the CERT investigation, but it's a very shoddy video. Everybody that's in the video is basically covered from head to toe. So you can't even make out faces. Like literally they are in like masks, which is pretty interesting. So it's very hard to say who is who even on that scene. And to my knowledge, and I have to double check this, and it's a great suggestion to go digging through microdots. Maybe somebody there has done a job of cleaning up some video from that day. But the only video from that day that I'm aware of would be from the Sally Port, right? Tully is a little bit taller, though, is my understanding. I think Tully is a little bit taller. This would also be some, you know who else? I mean, Turtle Boy would be the other person to go digging around because he would know the heights of all of these guys because he stood next to them all, right? He would know exactly how tall Brian Tully is. He would know exactly how tall, I know Buchanan is shorter, but I know he would know exactly how tall Buchanan is, right? Deborah was watching all of this, right? Deborah was inside the dispatch watching the videos of everybody at the Sally Port. So she certainly would know who was where, right? And we know that, so this would have been later though, when Berkowitz and Higgins are next to the car for a wildly long time, it would have been later. Yes, I will. Denise, I will email him and ask him about the heights. You would think he would know too. He might know. But we need to find that out. We need to find out who that person is. It's absolutely critical. We need to find out who the guy is in that Sally Port video. It's definitely, it's not one of the guys from Canton. It's got to be one of the Massachusetts State Police guys. And we have to figure out who that is. It certainly looks like a bald guy, right? It does. Looks like a bald guy. He also, interestingly, is one of the first people to hold out his hand to shake the hands of the guys that are from like the Canton troopers, Canton cops. I don't know what they're called. So that's something else to be mindful of. But yeah, I mean, got to figure out who that is, because if that's Brian Tully, that's just it's a critical detail that is essentially proof, right? Proof that is the guy who finds the taillight about an hour later, lying to us, like telling us at 5:30 p.m. he is on site somewhere that we absolutely can see with our own eyes that he is not, and he is the guy who admittedly finds the taillight pieces. Right. So I don't know. Is Trooper Paul on site that day? I thought Trooper Paul comes on site the next day. I might be wrong, though. I don't know if he was on site that same night with the car. Might be the next day. Because remember, it was like, a crazy snowstorm. And, it was snowing wet, into the night, basically. I don't know what time the snow stops. That would be something else to look into. But so that is where I wanted for us to stop for tonight. This video goes on and, like I said, it's going to be a kind of a bigger ordeal when I'm finished with it. But I feel like I've got to figure out whether or not Brian Tully is the third or fourth person in that video from the Massachusetts State Police, because if that is, that is just enormous. That is basically, seals the deal. It did look like Tully. It does look like Tully, right? It really, really does look like Tully. And if that is, I can't. It's like too easy almost. I'm very grateful for Devers, by the way, Devers. Very grateful for her because she really helped me to understand that the Boston PD was very much involved in this, right? I mean, maybe they were kind of like a loose association, but they were involved. Like they were involved. They have their hands on this too. Their hands are in the cookie jar here also. And that might be something for a little bit later, would be to go figure out who exactly from the Boston Police Department would have been actually more involved directly at that time. So for a different day, but I will keep you guys all posted on everything I find out, of course. And if you hear anything, let me know. You can always email me. My email is listed in all of the videos and will be in the show notes from this tonight. really easy once you hear it. Easy. So keep me posted if you hear anything, if you know anything, if you learn anything, of course. And I will be back here again next Wednesday night, 10 p.m. And God only knows what we'll be going over then, but I'm sure it'll be interesting because it always is when it comes to this case. And I told you, I'm so obsessive. I'm going to figure it out. Thank you. That person. So somebody's telling us Song Bits Laura saying, found out Brian Tully's 5'9". How tall is Michael Proctor and Yuri Buchanan? Because that guy looks like it could have been 5'9". Looks like it could have been. Could have been. We're going to figure it out, you guys. We're going to figure it out. I'm telling you, we're going to. All right, everybody, have a beautiful rest of your night. Enjoy. And happy 4th of July. Have a beautiful 4th of July. Enjoy it. 4th of July is one of my happiest holidays. So it's going to be a blast. We will see you guys all next week. Everybody enjoy the rest of your night and weekend. Bye.